Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining this Reading the Water conversation. Hello, my name is Erick Mott, and I'm the CEO at Creatorbase. We're a B2B community and media organization for creative business people and technology industry leaders everywhere. Creatorbase operates from the San Francisco, Silicon Valley area, where I've worked for 30 years at leading brands including ServiceNow, Oracle, Nokia, Sun Microsystems, Philips, and several startups. Now for your featured speaker. Blaine Mathieu is a multi-time software CEO and tech exec, former Gartner analyst, and author of The River Doesn't Wait, a senior executive guide to navigating the surge of agentic AI. He led market intelligence at Adobe and has worked with global enterprises including Ford, ABB, and SoftBank. Blaine wrote his first published piece on AI, can you believe it, in 1990, and has
I,
followed the field closely ever since. I've seen this firsthand. He speaks worldwide on agentic AI and corporate strategy and on preserving and amplifying the impact of human intelligence.
hmm.
So, regarding the format, you can see there's the two of us here. It's going to be very much of a conversation. Um, we're going to be pulling questions from the River Doesn't Wait discussion guide, which is free to everybody. You'll learn more about that in a moment. The last 15 minutes, so roughly around the bottom of the hour, we'll open up for questions. And since we're using chat, we'd like you to think as you're hearing the discussion and seeing some of the related information, think about that one burning question that you have, either as a senior leader or someone you are supporting who is a senior leader. We'll monitor chat, and this will be a fun conversation. So, ready to start, everyone? Okay, great. Let's get into it. So, Blaine, I'm going to give you a really easy question to start.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, we'd like to start easy, on these things, but I think it's very personal to you, and I'd love to learn more about like why the concept of this book.
Well, I've wanted to write a business book probably for the last 20 years, really ever since I hit the what you might call the senior executive level of enterprises, both large and small. And I always thought I had a lot of good ideas, but I never had the, sort of the hook or the driver, the thing that would make somebody want to read this now.
Hmm.
And it really is fundamentally, for those that have already seen it or at least seen the website with some of the content, this is a book on corporate strategy. It's not really a book about AI, but AI is the driver that makes you have to rethink and think about your corporate strategy at a speed you never had to before. So once I saw Agentic AI coming, and actually more specifically, I hosted an event at Stanford Research Institute put on by the Post Industrial Institute uh, early this year on Agentic AI, I realized that wow, the time is now, and we do really need, enterprise leaders, especially operational leaders who aren't a CIO or CTO, really need to rethink how they're thinking, or reimagine maybe is the better word, how they're thinking
Hmm.
about setting and continuously setting strategy for their companies. So time was now, and as you said, I wrote my first article on AI back in 1990, and I think has now come full circle with this book coming out.
Hmm. Yeah. And the river concept, the metaphor, where did that come from? Why did you choose that?
Well, that was interesting. I was probably a third of the way into writing the book, and I realized that I need that, it would be great to have sort of an analogy that I could run throughout the entire thing that would help people, again, who aren't AI people, they're not technologists, but they just need to think about the concepts in a coherent manner. And maybe actually, to be more clear, the challenge I had a third of the way into the book was I realized I had about 10 analogies in the book,
Mm.
and this wasn't going to work. I had to find a way to really boil it down to one theme that could continue throughout the writing and the thought process. And I have to give my son credit, actually, who's a content marketing strategist and understands and is a very good writer. He read through the first two chapters and said, how about the concept of don't use a pyramid, don't use this and that. How about the concept of a river, Blaine? You're talking about this flow of agentic AI continuing, constantly causing a corporate strategist, an operator, to have to think about their position. You talk about surges and this notion of these events happening that might cause changes in the river. This, maybe that's the analogy you're searching for. And I had a huge aha moment. He was exactly right. So that's how we got to the core analogy through the whole book, and how we actually got to the title of the book.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great metaphor. And, before like any frameworks that we get into here, just tell why didn't you just say, hey folks, go out and buy the book, read the book?
Well, the whole point of discussing these concepts live was really core part of the genesis. I mentioned the Stanford Research Institute Agentic AI event that I did back earlier in the year. In prep for that event, I actually had a couple dozen discussions, and a bunch of them are actually posted on YouTube. Interviews and discussions I did, sort of like you're doing with me, with leaders in the field of agentic AI, both vendors and technologists and practitioners and people that are actually using the technology. And so that through that discussion format, I realized, wow, this is complex stuff. We just have to sort of talk it through. And that's why I thought it's more important to set a foundation really based on the discussion guide that's in the book, and it's available for anybody to download on the website. That's really, I think, the most important part of the book. The other chapters, they just prepare your mind for how to think about these things, but it's really about working it through with your team that really matters. And as a quick aside, as both a management and startup consultant and somebody who's worked with large enterprises for decades, I really enjoy working with teams, getting the hard problems out on the whiteboard and figuring out how to solve them, strategic challenges. And so that's, I think, what the book tries to help do as well. And
Yeah. And, meeting in person is always a better way to, form great connections with people, brainstorm, do real deep thinking and strategic type of work. As we get into it, this book, and I read it, and it's great. It's a very quick read. You can read it easily within 3 hours. Um, Really easy to follow. And I love the metaphor. It's really about choices. So let's start with the core choices that the book kind of hinges on, which is retrofit or reimagine. Can you share with us, what do you mean by that? And if you have any visual aids, that'd be great.
yeah, I think we decided we were gonna just pop up a few visuals here from the book. And again, all of this stuff is actually on the website River Doesn't Wait as well, so you can get the full summary of the core frameworks and concepts from the book. All the visuals we're going to show today are also on the website, and the workshop guide that I talked about earlier. So this notion of retrofit versus reimagine, I think, is really is the fundamental working premise. So while you're navigating your organizational boat on this river, the current's continually flowing and changing, surges are coming, and it's the river of agentic AI. You have to decide for each particular destination, each particular goal you have that is in front of your organization. Do you just want to retrofit? In other words, make some changes to how you're doing that work today, but fundamentally it's the same work, it's the same goal. Maybe you're just doing it faster or more efficiently. Or is it important and possible for you, given the state of the technology today, to really reimagine not only how you do it and who does it, but actually even potentially what the goal is, right? How you can have new goals, new ways of thinking about what's even possible to achieve for your organization. That's the reimagine end of the spectrum. And one of the most important takeaways, and I spend a lot of time in the book discussing this, is these are not one-time choices relative to each goal that you have. These are choices you have to continuously make as these surges of agentic AI are impacting your organization, impacting the boat that you're navigating through these waters. So that's the basic framework that we start with here.
Yeah, and tell me more about these surges. And again, it's a great visual. I love how you thinking about it. Have there been any lately that, kind of top of mind for you?
Well, they're coming constantly for sure, and I think that's one of the big challenges for an executive trying to understand what's going on in the market right now, because you can easily get overwhelmed with all the news about the latest model release, the latest new company, the latest AI agentic harness, you name it, right?
Yeah.
I subscribe to all of these things because I need, as part of what I do is to help ingest all this stuff and translate it. It's just absolute information overload like we've never seen before in the history of technology. And so I define a surge as not just every little thing that is happening in this space, but the occurrences that really are likely to have a fundamental impact in either how you're, navigating your boat through these waters or changing the goals that you are looking to achieve. And as a quick aside, to help leaders filter through all that stuff, the website actually has a thing you can easily just subscribe to, and it's a monthly briefing I put out that tries to boil down all of this noise into just 3 or 4 key things that are more likely than not to be surges that could affect your organization.
Yeah, no, I agree. You almost need to have an agent that summarizes everything because there's just so much information coming at
Well,
us.
I am your agent, so I'm
Yeah.
going to do that some of that work
Yeah,
for you.
of course. Okay, and before we kind of move on, I'm just checking in the chat. Just a reminder, if you've just joined us, thank you. If you could just think about what is your burning question you have for Blaine, because at the end of the bottom of the hour here, we're going to get into questions. So just type it in or think about it and type it in the chat. We are scanning that as we go. So again, back to the book and kind of how you structured it. You talk about 3 tensions. And if I recall, the key ones
Well,
were work.
Eric,
Oh,
actually,
yeah, sure.
before you get into the tensions, which is definitely the core of it, I realized I didn't actually answer your question. You asked me, have there been any surges lately? And
Oh,
I
okay.
talked
Gotcha.
generically about the surge monitoring thing, but there have been, some of the ones that I wrote about recently in the monthly briefing was a lot of us saw that Jeff Bezos raised a whole bunch of
Yes.
money, I think $12 billion for his new company Prometheus at a $44 billion valuation. I love these AI numbers. It's just it's incredible. But this is really all about bringing AI to the physical world. And
Mhm.
back to my thought about the impact, the goals that we can achieve with agentic AI are rapidly moving beyond things that software could just achieve on its own, right, in the digital world, and moving these into the physical world, the operational technology side of things. So that's a surge I wrote about,
Yeah.
in the previous briefing, and I think that's definitely something for executives to watch and think about. Another one, which is more recent, just in the last week or 10 days, the Kimi K3 open weights model release. I will say in general, I absolutely do not see the constant cavalcade of model releases as being surges that any operational executive should really be concerned about. Let your CIO or CTO think about these things. But every once in a while, like with the Mythos release a few months ago that then got pulled back, and now with the Kimi K3 release, these kind of things are meaningful enough, either in terms of capability or in terms of cost, capability
Mhm.
versus cost, like the open weights models, that there is probably some chance that this kind of surge opens up new capabilities for your organization that weren't cost effective or even possible before. So that's another example of a more recent so-called surge that I actually haven't written this one up. That'll be in the next briefing, but those are the kind of things I'm watching for.
Okay. Yeah, and I look forward to that. I've already read your first round of briefings, and of course visited the site. Um, okay, so back to the tensions. Didn't mean to jump the gun there a little bit
Nope, all
here, but
good.
I'm excited about kind of getting into some of the deeper details here of the book and your thinking. So the 3 tensions: workflow and workforce, context, and supervision, autonomy, and governance. Can you just kind of one by one go through those and give some examples?
Sure. Why don't I pop up just to make it for the visual learners out there? I'll pop up a little diagram that sort of shows what you were talking about. So, I describe your domain of control as an operating executive running a business or an organization, and again, you're flowing in these waters of agentic AI and capability, and the surges are coming and rocking your boat and moving it faster or slower. And then you've got these three, I call them tensions, and these are three basically settings that you can set in your boat to help you more effectively use the agentic AI capabilities to get to where you want to go. And the first one being around a workflow and workforce is really important, because a lot of thought these days is being put toward workforce, and it relates to the question of AI and agents replacing humans and reorganizing your departments by using humans, by using agents instead of humans. But I think that's a very limiting way to think about it, because workflow is about how you actually get the work done. And by integrating agentic AI into your organization in effective ways, it's not just about replacing humans or making a process more efficient. It's about rethinking what's even possible. Block, Jack Dorsey's company is a good case study in that. Some of you have read about that. If you haven't, you can look it up, and we talk a lot about it in the book. But he's a sort of an out there thinker, but his way of considering this is he's reorganizing Block, about a 4,000 person company, from being your sort of standard corporate hierarchy to being what he calls an intelligence. And that's using AI and agentic AI to remove a lot of the middle layer that is just about moving information up and down and processing and filtering information, and instead have people at the market interface layer. That's where they are the most important. And then, a small decision layer at the top when the hard decisions need to be made, and mostly enable the people that are market and customer facing to be able to make the decisions themselves without that intermediary layer that's providing mostly governance, we'll talk about in a second. So that's a really interesting case study and a pretty radical shift of both workflow and workforce that I talk about in the book. Here, let me take the screen down here and we can just talk about some others. The second one, you talked about context. So context is a very often used term in the context of AI and agentic AI. But what I'm really talking about here is not just the data you provide your agents or your AI systems. It's the organizational context. And there's a strong analogy between that and the domain or the scope of control that you actually have in the organization. That is the context. And again, if you were running just a non-AI team, like you have been running probably for many years now, you know that the more context you can give your people, the better they understand your goals, what you're ultimately trying to achieve, what the rules and even mores of the organization are all about, the greater the chance is that you're going to have a high-performing team that's able to run quickly and efficiently and effectively. And that way of thinking about context is exactly the same in organizations that are implementing agentic AI as ones that haven't done it yet. And the other thing I discuss in the book is this notion of there are different levels of context. And the easiest one, you might say, is just the context you and your organization specifically has. Gets more challenging, but probably closer to the reimagine end of the spectrum if you expand that context to include other organizations, other departments, and then finally even externally to include other partners and even across into customers. So that's the context side of things. I've got one more, but I want to pause. Eric, any thoughts or questions about that?
No, I think it's a great way of laying things out and organizing the thinking. If you were going to provide some more examples on both, do you have any additional things you could reference?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking. Yeah, and again, many examples and case studies in the book. But in the book, in the chapter about context, I talk about Moderna, and you see a lot of companies. I think even ServiceNow, one of your alma mater, has done something similar, unifying the roles of HR in terms of a chief people officer and a chief digital officer literally into one role. And ServiceNow has actually done something different. And so why would they do that? They want to be able to provide a full, one way of thinking about it is they want to be able to provide a full integrated context that's not just the technology silo and then the people or flow silo, right, with their own context, their own rules and sets of information, but bringing those things together to figure out how to make them most impactful together. So there's some really interesting examples of organizational redesign that I think boil fundamentally down to context enhancement right now for these systems. And then the final one you mentioned earlier was around sort of boiling in together this notion of agentic autonomy, and layering on supervision and governance to make that happen. Right. That's governance and AI governance is just an absolute critical topic today. And Eric, you've probably seen a lot of this right now in the writing and the press.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you've got some examples too. I think in the book, if I recall, there was Air Canada and Microsoft Copilot. Can you give us some more details around that?
Absolutely. So many. It's probably governance of AI is probably the hottest topic right now in general in enterprise AI discussion circles, and I talk about this notion of bolt-on governance, which basically means you set up your agentic AI systems to do things, and then you have a layer of error checking, of error correction, of something that tries to fix things after they happen and maybe prevent them from getting out in the first place. Mm-hmm. Whereas built-in governance is, which I describe in a lot of detail, is about when you provide enough context, back to context, to your systems so that they don't make those errors, those mistakes in the first place. Mm-hmm. And there's sort of an early canonical example of this that Air Canada, when they have a specific policy around bereavement and bereavement flights and compensating people for that, or charging people for those things. And unfortunately, they hadn't provided their agentic AI chat system with the same level of context, so it didn't understand the nuances of those policies. And because of that lack of appropriate context, they in fact they didn't have the proper governance layer in either to prevent this thing from making mistakes and costing them not a lot of money in those particular cases, but a lot of brand equity. Mm-hmm. And so really thinking through, again, the closer you get back to the retrofit versus reimagination, the more you need to think about having built-in governance into the system versus bolting it on after. The more you need to think about how expanding the layers of context, right, might be necessary to reimagine what you're trying to do. And then the more you have to think about truly rethinking not just the workforce, not just the people and the agents, but the flow, what you actually do, those things, thinking of them all together.
Mm. Very good insight. And, again, I like the way you organize the tensions, get into the detail in the book. One thing I just want to pause real quick before I ask some more questions. If you've joined us later, thank you. If you have a question, a burning question, just please drop it into the chat, because we'll be coming up on your opportunity to ask questions or for us to answer them, for Blaine to answer them at the bottom of the hour. So, all right. So the book, what I like about the way you've organized the book and all the content on the site, it ends with a working session where leadership teams, come in and they read the water on an outcome they own. We can't do that here, that kind of a private version live, obviously, because we don't have clients or, customers here or executives we're talking with. But can you kind of walk us through that a little bit? And I know there's an example with JP Morgan's new client onboarding, which is probably a pretty good example for you to dive into a bit more.
Yeah, JP Morgan, for those that have read the book, is sort of a canonical case study that I carry throughout the book, because they're really a leader, frankly, in thinking through a lot of these things. And you can read a lot of the public statements from Jamie Dimon over the last couple of years specifically on the topic of agentic AI. And so you can search for some of the stuff online, and I talk about a lot of it in the book as well. So definitely a leader in terms of this. And look, JP Morgan has about a $20 billion, with a B, dollar IT budget, and many hundreds of AI use cases that they've already talked about. They say they're going to 1,000 use cases by the end of this year. And many of those are actually agentic AI use cases, not just implementations of LLMs or chatbots to help people, but implementations of agentic AI. The one you mentioned, Eric, specifically, I talk about in detail, is around their KYC process. KYC is in financial services and many other industries is know your customer. And fundamentally, this is actually a critical and highly regulated process that any financial services firm has to implement when they onboard a new customer. It's not just about getting the name and address and all that information. Of course, they need that, but they need to prove the actual identity of that person, prove ownership of assets, determine if there are any sanctions or any PEP, politically exposed, if that person is a PEP, a politically exposed person, if there's any adverse media assigned to a risk tier. It's actually a very complex process, especially for larger accounts, obviously, for somebody like JP Morgan. And in the past, the coordination and integration of that process actually took, on average, 5 days from beginning to end to make it happen. Okay, for a new client to join JP Morgan. And the reason is every step in that process was effectively a different department, a different person, lots of new information, handoffs, a lot of complexity. If you can believe it, they now claim that by pushing this entire process through agentic AI, they went from 5 days to an average 2 minutes. No, wow. That's not. In fact, yeah, under 2 minutes. So they claim in some settings, it's a 1 minute process. And I can show another quick diagram here. And obviously, this is not JP Morgan's strategy for KYC. This is just a representation of what it could look like. But they made the decision to move solidly toward the reimagine spectrum, to rethink not only how they could make this process faster, but to fundamentally change how it runs by providing very strong context across these previously siloed areas and providing agentic oversight to every element in the process. It wasn't just 5 silos with a handoff between each one, but it was one integrated system that used, had all the context they need. And this process did have the organizational layer cover. I talk about in the book some of the criteria you need to be successful in these kinds of reimaginations. It had the organizational layer cover right at the very highest levels to make this happen. And by the way, Jamie Dimon and other executives have stated clearly that as part of this restructuring, they did not lay off a single person. It allowed them to take these highly trained people, experienced people who were previously just running this process and move them into areas where they could have much more impact. So this is really exciting, and you can look it up online, JP Morgan KYC process, agentic AI. You can also read about it in the book and then understand how the context that I set here fits to that process.
Yeah, let's hope other companies follow suit in terms of, optimizing, but, optimizing with humans in the middle. What are your thoughts on that? Just given all your research and the book, what are some of the keys to that?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical that organizations retain the value of the human intelligence that they've built up over the years, right? How that's used, where it's most effective, again, JP Morgan being a great example, is different for every organization. And again, some of the elements of the workshop that I discuss in the book take you through how to think about that process. At the macro level, I think there's going to be a lot of change over the next 5 to 10 years. And some of it could be painful change. But I am very optimistic that leaders of organizations can work to figure out how to get us to a better outcome at the end, both for their companies, for the thing they're trying to run, and for the people and for society at large. I'm very optimistic about that. And I have actually a final chapter in the book on that specific topic.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen in the news where a lot of companies have, for example, made investments in AI, agentic, or whatever. Workforces were adjusted, removed, layoffs, and then some hires back because they realized some of the capability, the talent, was
absolutely
is needed. I think no matter what, though, we
Not to and
all
not to
as
call out not to call out one of my former clients and a great company, Ford, but you might the folks on the video here might have read about a recent pullback. They just rehired about 250 very experienced technicians. They originally thought that AI and AI agents were going to replace all the knowledge and experience of these people, and they fairly quickly realized that those people have they understand a lot of context back that it's going to be very challenging for AI systems to ingest in any reasonable length of time, and they had to undo that
yeah.
decision. And another example that I talk about at length in the book is Klarna, which made some pretty significant changes to his customer success team, and in terms of many hundreds of people, and then quickly realized that that was actually a big mistake. So reimagination does not mean, you know, get rid of a bunch of people, right? What
Right.
reimagination means is how do you more effectively achieve your goals using these technologies and the people that you've got together.
But on that theme, I do believe as part of the reimagination for companies and all the work force that's involved, is each of us as individuals, we need to think about how do we pivot? How do we expand our capability? What do we need to learn in order to be better suited for what's coming?
Yep.
Kind of getting ahead of that, those different currents and surges.
Yep.
And that's just, I think that's continuous learning, continuously expanding where you can go. And I caution a lot of people to not even think about a title. Don't think of yourself as a title or a seniority on a ladder. Think of yourself as a business domain expert. How are you building your expertise through reading, like, material like what you're putting out in the briefing docs, connecting with people that are smart around you so you can learn from them, and keep building yourself. And I think probably the first time in history where not only have we had to kind of operate and perform day to day, but at the same time learn and expand. And that's really challenging and stressful
Yep.
for people.
Yep.
So I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that?
No,
Because I know that
it's
you've balanced some of that pretty well yourself.
yeah, no, it's well said, Eric, because back to one of your opening questions about why the book and why now. The pace of change now driven by technology is far surpassing anything we've ever seen before. And
Yeah.
there's no single individual that can just lock themselves in a room and figure out what to do about this, right? We've got to get with others, get with our team, or even beyond the close team that any folks here might be running, and work together to reimagine the future possibilities together and how to achieve that. And that's we've had a lot of technology revolutions over the last 30 years: the internet revolution, the cloud, SaaS, all of these things, right? And you and I have been part of all of these things.
Sure.
This one is fundamentally different, and that's to bring it full circle. That's why I wrote the book, not as a book about agentic AI. It's a book about how to think about strategy for your organization in a new way, and how to collaborate with others to do that thinking and that watching. So anyway, great point, Eric.
Yeah. And strategy isn't just for the top leadership team. Everyone needs to have fluency, in strategy and how to, expand around strategy with the different developments that are happening in the world and with
Yep.
technology. We are coming close to the bottom
Yep.
of the hour. In fact, we are.
Yeah, we
And
are.
I do see some questions coming in. So, Blaine, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we get
I
into
think
some of the questions?
let's get right into it.
Okay. Okay. So, thank you all. If you please keep sharing your questions, I'm going to read them just top to bottom here.
Oh, yeah.
So Riley said, should teams retrofit first to learn, then reimagine, or jump in and learn on the way by reimagining? So kind of learn by
Yeah.
doing. I think that's what that question is.
Great question, Riley. And it might seem intuitively obvious that makes sense. Let's start simple and just get going. And in general, that's pretty good advice for most things. The danger, though, is, and this is, I talk a lot about this in the book, is about getting stuck. Navigating your boat through this river of agentic AI and the surges that are coming is not a one-time event. It's not, do something. Okay, we did it. We reimagined. We restructured our customer success team. We're done. Okay, it's about continuously navigating, these waters, based on the surges that are affecting you and affecting the market overall. So I think starting with something simpler and quicker, like a retrofit, that's perfectly fine. But just be aware that you don't fall into the trap of thinking, okay, I've done it. I've got agents running in my customer service department. I'm good. Because as I mentioned in the book, a retrofit is easy and quick for you relatively, which means it's also easy and quick for your competition. So
Mm.
if you actually want sustainable competitive advantage, that's probably more going to be found on the reimagined side.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The whole competitive angle. And Christina's question kind of speaks to that a little bit, like leading indicators. And I'll read her question. What are some examples of signals of the current changing well in advance? I would
Mm,
assume the sooner, more in advance you can see the signal, the better, before the actual surge
yeah.
hits.
Well, in many cases, it's hard to tell because it's happening so fast, and we're looking back in hindsight at all of these events at lightning speed. But lately, we've actually had the advantage, if you want to think about that, of being given some warnings that a surge is coming. For example, just when I was finalizing the book, Mythos got released from Anthropic, and I'm sure everybody on the call has heard about this and is relatively familiar with the story. And that was, although model releases aren't generally surges, this one was a significant increase in capability, and either it became a warning of a surge because the U.S. government quickly helped to remove that model, or in fact, initially, actually, Anthropic themselves warned about it, but only let a small set of users use it. And then eventually the US government themselves also helped pull it back for a little while. So that was one where we actually had some warning about a surge that was coming. And that kind of warning does happen occasionally. I actually think the Kimi 3 open weights model thing I mentioned earlier, and again, I generally don't think of model releases as surges. Just two examples, though, is another great example, because what we're seeing is these relatively inexpensive open models becoming more and more widely available. That, I think, should be seen as not just the surge of what Kimi K3 did, but there is going to be a fundamental ability to rethink what the cost curve looks like for implementing these systems that's on its way in the second half of this year. And K3 is a warning sign that a much bigger surge is coming. So I talk a lot about how you monitor and watch for surges in the book and in the discussion guide, which is also on the website. And I think anybody that's interested in diving into this more should take a look there.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm just watching the time. I know we want to finish up around
Yep.
45 minutes in. I do have a question here. Look, you've covered some great ground here in terms of the key frameworks, use cases, examples. Um, Whether you're a leader that's responsible for the strategy or someone that is supporting a leader, what should they do? Like whether it's tomorrow or Monday or when they have a chance, what do you recommend they do?
Yeah. Get a cross-functional, like before that, pick an outcome that your organization, your company, your department, whatever it is your boat looks like that's navigating this river. Pick an outcome that is very important to you. And then get a cross-functional team together. And to your point, Eric, doesn't all have to be senior executives, and probably better if it's not, right? People that are more tech forward, more agent savvy, technology people as well as business people. My book is not written for CTOs and CIOs. It's written for business operators. But that's not to say the CIOs and CTOs don't need to be in the room as well, right? You need to get a wide context set. And then really think through, okay, given what's possible today, to what degree is it possible to reimagine both either the outcome we're moving toward or how we are getting there? And again, the workshop guide, which is on the website, gives some very specific questions, a guide that you can actually work your team through to think about, to reflect on, and internally, and then discuss what you should be doing to potentially reimagine where you need to go. That's how I would start, but don't do it generically. Don't think
Mm,
what should it's important that this is not about what is our AI strategy, right? What is
yeah.
our agentic strategy? Forget about that. What is your organizational strategy, right? What kind of outcome are you trying to drive toward? And then figure out how you can take where we are and where we're going to get there.
Yeah. And one more question that's kind of related to what you just said about getting started, came in earlier and I missed it is, and I think it's related because it's how do you lead a big vision relative to what the current team's capabilities are? So on one hand, you just gave some guidance on how to kind of get started, but again, the capability may not be necessarily where you need it to be for that big vision. So what are some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah. Well, this I think the answer to your question has nothing to do with AI or agentic AI,
Of
right?
course.
This is about being a leader in the organization. And it's really interesting because my book touches on leadership in the age of AI, but recently I've seen just a raft of new books and content come out on that topic, and I think it's a very valid discussion. But at the end of the day, it's effective leadership is about how do you bring a team and an organization through change, and through constant change, and through increasing speed of change. That's what differentiates effective leaders from less effective leaders. So it's not an AI question. It's a question of change management and having the vision to see where you want to go. And none of those principles have really changed in the last few decades, from my perspective.
Yeah, and just remaining flexible and eager to learn and expand,
Of course.
so
Of
you can
course.
drive toward those outcomes. So I think we're about ready to close here. And Blaine, I think you have maybe one or two more things to share to close out.
Yeah,
Uh,
of course. Well, just the contact info, obviously, how to get a hold of you and your creator base organization, which I'm a founding member of. And so, thank you for
Thank
doing
you.
this, Eric. And it's great,
Appreciate you.
great stuff you're doing. For anybody that's interested, I highly recommend you go to the website and check it out. And of course, as I've said probably too many times in this discussion, the website for the book, riverdoesn'twait.com, contains a lot of the materials that we've been talking about today, including the discussion guide. And you can reach out to me at LinkedIn, and actually Blaine at riverdoesn'twait.com is also how you can reach out to me directly. And I'd be happy to talk to any of you in more detail about any of this.
And this recording will be available soon, and for you to revisit. And please do share with others, that you think will find this valuable. And we really do appreciate you participating today, and hope you have a great day. Take care.
Thank you all.